Welcome, everyone. Well, I don't know about all of you, but I certainly feel smarter after that keynote address. But I think we will feel even more so after this panel because it is focused on smart communities. See what I did there? All right, let me just take it away, turn things over to Nick Rocha.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for being with us, especially after a good meal. I know we can all have puppy belly after a really good food like that. So our job is to make sure that you are informed and a little bit educated, but also maybe a little bit entertained. So, but I did want to kind of start this off by talking about what is a smart community, right? The definition of the dictionary, a smart community refers to a community that leverages the technology and data analysis to improve the quality of life for its residents by optimizing services, infrastructure, and resource management, making it valuable through enhanced sustainability, citizen engagement, economic development, and improved safety, all while addressing the challenges like traffic congestion, energy consumption, and environmental impact. So we're actually very honored to have these two guests with us here today. Our actual panel moderator had an emergency, so I'm stepping in to be the panel moderator, so I'm completely unprepared, but being a military guy for 26 years, we're used to stepping in the gap and filling the roles when needed, so we're gonna make this really great. So out of respect for these gentlemen, I'm gonna allow them to introduce themselves, what company they represent, and then a little bit about their history and why they apply to this, so thank you.
Awesome. Good afternoon. My name's Kyle Allwine. I am Manager of Public Relations at Northern Neck Electric Cooperative, which is a rural electric cooperative serving east of Fredericksburg down the peninsula. Also formerly was the Director of Economic Development at Stafford County, where one of my jobs was I was the coordinator with the Smart Community Test Bed in Stafford, Virginia. And then at Northern Neck Electric, I'm also the project coordinator for all of our new large power load dedicated facilities, which you can probably guess what that means.
Beautiful.
I'm Tom Strickland. I'm President and CEO of Hypercritical Infrastructure, also a partner with Nick at Neptune Shield. 40-something years in IT. My primary focus has been critical infrastructures, oil, gas, chemical, nuclear, power grid, water systems, financial and healthcare around the globe, trying to help design, protect, recover, audit, assess these critical infrastructures and doing compliance of all of them as needed.
Wonderful. And then a little bit about myself. I was a Navy SEAL for 26 years, got out, decided to get in industry and see what I could do to give back. And then I recognized that there was truly a need to help bring innovation from industry, academia, and with government stakeholders together in one location. And so we created the Neptune Shield Technology Hub, or Tech Hub for short, located in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Really an incubator accelerator, but with lots of different aspects to it. So great opportunity to bring all the different, entrepreneurs who maybe have a widget or a software or something that could solve a unique problem, bring them into the ecosystem. And then as our last guest speaker talked about, having that kind of collective shared defense where you're not having to spend a whole bunch, but you're really gaining from the collective of working together. So, and we have Dominique with us, so I'll hand back over the moderation to him and we'll go from there. They might turn it on in the booth for you.
Can you guys hear me? All right, there we go.
There we go.
Forgive me for being a couple minutes late. Something just popped up. So I'm Dominic Romano. I was speaking earlier. I'm going to be asking you guys a couple of really good questions. Really looking forward to this discussion because the work that you guys do here in the region for helping to foster innovation and doing so in a way that really pushes the way that we think about policy to its extremes and limits, right? Because when you're doing deep tech at this level, you're really stressing out actually the political system and the policy system that we have, because you're almost forcing it to evolve to keep up with these new innovations and threat vectors that arise as a result of these new innovations, right? So really happy to be here with you guys to have this discussion. So the first question I kind of want to pose is, as we're running through this process of, you know, fostering innovation and fostering, you know, a local ecosystem to develop deep tech and to develop like smart city technologies, what have you. What are some of the hurdles in scale? So when you go from, you know, testing in a small community for a smart city tech, where you might have 10 traffic lights, what are the big hurdles that come across, that you guys face with then bringing that adoption to, you know, a larger city that might have, you know, 20,000 traffic lights?
A lot of that is going to be infrastructure monitoring. For instance, in order to put in smart lights, do you have the fiber optics to have command and control from the lights, the control systems back to the control centers? Who's controlling it? Do you have a command center? Do you have it staffed? Is it 24/7? Is it automated? It's the communications in between. So there's a lot of components to actually have a smart street light work properly and have it managed, monitored, and adaptable as traffic patterns change throughout the day, and such.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead. The other thing I was going to add is just more practically, you know, particularly in more rural areas, you know, it's interesting. I once had a discussion with a board of supervisor, and they mentioned, hey, you know, this next Sheetz or Buc-ee's or whatever, we want half of the pumping stations to actually be EV chargers. And I said, okay, we could do that. You know, we want to, you know, be a smart community. I'm going to need a substation zoned right next to it. And she was like, what? The community doesn't want us transformers and things like that right next to the door. And I go, well, then you're probably not going to have half of them be chargers. The problem is that we've designed an electric grid infrastructure since, you know, at least in our area, since 1937, that just went, you know, shortest distance. And now it needs to follow roadways and things like that. So to do smart traffic lights, you know, I'm also thinking, you know, I'm going to need a transformer here. I'm going to need this. Oh, and then if we do, you know, the new Swedish thing of the under pavement charging, and now I need a whole different infrastructure network that was never designed that way. And so I'm almost going to have to reinvent and rethink my entire grid.
Gotcha. And what are some of the policy implications of that? So when you're dealing with policymakers, to first off make them aware of the intricacies, or not fully the intricacies technically, but the intricacies of where policy needs to elevate to meet the demands of where we're at today. What are some things that kind of come up in that, you know, in that space when you're working with, you know, your local jurisdictions to, you know, bring smart cities to play, especially considering the risks of, you know, be it cybersecurity, be it critical infrastructure attacks, what have you?
I was going to say, I think it depends on what are you doing with the smart city. For instance, Nick came up with he had a really good definition of what a smart city, smart community is. But you ask 10 people what a smart city is, you'll get 12 different answers because there is no one defined. For instance, some cities may want to use smart cities for surveillance, video cameras, safety, security, police. Others may want to do smart street lights, smart red lights, smart parking systems, convenience, things like that. Others may want to put in broadband wireless capabilities to the underserved. So there's a lot of different definitions of what a smart city is. So when you define what use in your smart city is going to do, then you can address the policies. So for instance, if it's surveillance and such, what legal surveillance issues do you have from a city standpoint, a state standpoint, federal standpoint? So you've got to go and figure out what those are. How are you going to address them? What about the public concerns? A lot of people don't want cameras on every street corner and doing surveillance. Well, if you're not doing that, that's less of a policy concern to address. but is it more of a convenience factor? So it really depends on what your definition and implementation of a smart city is. Then you can address the regulatory, legal, and the people policies of what they like and do not like.
I think another hurdle would be just NIMBYism. And it's not the fault of just everyday pedestrians, but I think it's actually partly our fault. Because for the last 100 years, we've talked about how dangerous electricity is and the electrical components. And that danger has now, that's what they know. They don't know that we're experts and know what we're doing and know how to site these facilities, how to design them safely, how to, intermesh them with this smart community so that it's done in a safe and effective way. You're starting to hear that a little bit with the, the discussion about SMRs, siting of that, solar facilities. It was, okay, no, we don't want them on agricultural land. We want them over parking lots. Now they're like, oh, well, then the runoff issue. So there's all these, secondary and tertiary things that at the end of the day, policymakers have allowed a populace that's not to their fault, rather uneducated on these topics, make these decisions when they need to be decisions made by industry with the policymakers, so that it's truly a well thought out decision.
That's a great point, and it brings me to the next question, which is, when you're thinking about the application of smart cities, what implications does that have on disaster response, right, or emergency management? In particular, I'm going to raise one point. So when we look at disaster response today, from the standpoint of drones, there's a massive constraint that occurs when it comes to privacy legislation, particularly data privacy legislation in certain jurisdictions, right? So, for example, if you're flying a drone overhead of a disaster scene, you can't just take that data that's being acquired from the drone and send it to a local NOC to be able to do some processing on it, because now you're transporting data that could potentially have privacy violations in it, right? So, if you're flying overhead and you're collecting imagery, but in that imagery you have license plates and you have faces, now there's a whole data privacy issue with that, which the disaster response policies don't necessarily account for, right? And that creates this issue where now we need to be more distributed compute focused to actually process some of this data either on scene or physically take a hard drive with data and drive it to a NOC to be able to actually process it. So when you kind of raise that problem, where does policy and the innovations that occur in our ability to respond to disasters, how do you really work better to educate policymakers that these are constraints that are coming up because we had a legacy policy apparatus that needs to be updated?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we saw recently at a drone spawner conference was, a law enforcement agency that is using drones as a first responder. They had a situation in Chula Vista, California. Car is reported by multiple drivers. Hey, there's a car that just went off the ditch here. It's on fire. We're at mile marker 7 now, but it was back here. Well, law enforcement, agents are sent out and they're patrolling, but the ambient light from the, city, they can't really tell. And this car is now in the ditch, but they really can't see the fire. But the drone flew out, and because of its vantage point, could actually respond faster, vector in the other law enforcement officers who were in vehicles to the actual spot. The guys got out, pulled the people out of the vehicle, saved lives seconds before the car blew up. That's a great example of how we want to use technology to improve our lives. But what we don't want is, as the drone's flying over, to be looking in your backyard and perving out on whatever. And no, I don't need them looking at our lives, but we do want them to help our lives, So I think that's where we have to make sure that we're very deliberate in working both with the community and the civil leaders to go, listen, we're okay with tech to be in our world and to help us to live our lives and to be more effective, especially if it's going to save lives. But what we don't want is for them to, encroach on some of our civil liberties. And I think that's really the line.
Yeah, and I think one constraint of that is that at my co-op, at my utility, we have 55 employees, 2 IT people. That issue of what I would call not understaffing, but right staffing, but it's not necessarily the right staffing to deal with these issues. That problem's exacerbated at towns and localities throughout Virginia that are not city of ... right? That have maybe 5,000 residents. They may have a county administrator that's also the IT administrator, and that's where government and private industry and consultants can really come together as a team. We've done that several times. We've gone out to our local volunteer fire departments where we're at. The majority of the fire departments are actually 100% volunteer. ODEC has joined with us, and we've done trainings on how to put out EV fires, which, spoiler alert, you don't, different things like that. But, we need to do that in the IT space, and have those discussions, because a lot of times, in these more rural areas, your policymakers are also volunteer, basically. They're part-time. They're doing this for 2 hours every month. And so, the amount of time and bandwidth that they have to think about these things and to make an informed decision is limited. So we really need to be the advocates for this and for the things like civil liberties, but also, particularly in our case, we're starting to use drones more, the sheriff's office, for missing children. And that brings up a lot of, issues, because now you're dealing with minors, right? And so, trying to walk through that, and then you got volunteer firefighters, or, a kid that's in high school that's a junior firefighter that could also see it. And there's a lot of problems that you got to work through, but we've got to do it as a community, because otherwise we're going to fail.
Yeah, and one of the ways to address that is in your incident response plan, you have normal standard operating procedures, SOP. It says that you have to care and feed for certain video data. For instance, drones can be operated certain ways and such. However, in the event of a disaster declaration, you have to change your protocols. So at that time, and I've worked with cities and counties to do this, that you go through a formal suspension of privacy or such, and then, but that starts up another auditing process. So then you do what you have to do to recover. Then at the end, you have a forensics that goes back and reanalyzes what happened during that time. Make sure that violations were not performed with video, for instance, surveillance, access to people's information or data because they were trying to find people that were missing. So you have to go back and account for what happened during that declaration. Then when you suspend the declaration of incident response, go back to normal, then you have a high level of assurance that privacy problems were not violated, people's privacy data and such. So even during a disaster declaration, you still have a formal process to recover the civil liberties aspect.
Oh, those are very good points. So I guess the next question I have is, when you have a regional tech incubator, accelerator, such like Neptune Shield, which you guys do amazing work at Neptune Shield, by the way. And if anyone in the audience hasn't heard of them here in the region, I really suggest you guys familiarize yourself with the work that Neptune Shield does. So when you're dealing with many different companies that are working on deep tech and working on innovating, what role does that incubator or accelerator or the tech hub have in understanding the technology that they represent and better educating policy with respect to that?
Yeah, great question. I think, in a resource-constrained environment, as a small company, as a small startup, maybe a person who has transitioned out of law enforcement or the military or was a first responder, and they've got, some really cool tech that they know would really help the entire law enforcement community or the military or the local community. They've got this widget or they've got this software that they're like, I know I could apply this, but I don't have all the answers. It's often said that, 2 brains are smarter than one. Well, why not have 15, 20 brains? And when you collaborate resources like that, put a lot of people together in a tech hub, now, you're paying for a private office, but you've got access to 3D printers, you've got, green screen rooms, you've got podcast booth, you've got classroom space, you can host events, networking events, but you also get to collaborate with other people, and that's where the innovation truly happens, because you may have somebody who, can't see the forest for the trees because they're inundated with their problem set. They've got a problem. They know that they have a partial solution, but they're just looking for that little spark to get them over the hump to really create something that's going to be memorable and, oh, by the way, profitable, right? Now you've got this other person who, well, they're an engineer or, they've worked in XYZ and you go, hey, let's put our heads together here and let's kind of brainstorm on something. And because of the unique perspective and the diversity that different people from different perspectives come from, now you've really got something unique. And then that's where the magic happens. And we often see that where, people from different industries come together and really create a unique solution. And then that's not only marketable and sellable, but it really does solve problems. And that's what we need more of.
Yeah, I think there's also a role that incubators play that's important about, as you asked the question of kind of explaining what that technology does, but also the benefits. So many times, you have a county administrator or town manager. They don't need to know what code is the base language or things like that. They need to know, is this going to detect a wildfire faster than a guy in a tower? And what's the cost benefit analysis of that? It costs $40,000 a year plus benefits to have the guy in the watchtower, but I can have, pay $5,000 and have these sensors on all the traffic lights and detect it faster and, and improve response times. And that's the dynamic that you've got with local government having constraints. And the other great thing about incubators is that once they get that foot in the door at one locality, you've got those piggybacking contracts in the Commonwealth of Virginia where they can pretty much just copy paste at localities. And so that really just accelerates that iterative development because each county is going to have its own use case that may be a little bit different.
Yeah.
Really good points. So that leads to another follow-up, which is, and I really like the point that you made about the culture within the innovation ecosystem, right? So a little background. When I was in Zurich for the Global AI Policy Summit at ETH Zurich in November, we had the Dean of Sciences from Harvard on stage, and he was like, oh, I really like the culture of this event where people come and, they debate, policy and what have you. Really, great comment that he made, just about that. But what I had followed up with in a question was, what are the cultural differences between, a Cambridge in Massachusetts versus a Switzerland, where, you have a different kind of collaboration that forms given the culture of Switzerland versus, the culture that exists in Boston, right? So when you're thinking about innovation in a tech hub or, the culture within the jurisdictions that are applying technology, right? So here's an example. Here in Virginia, you have a lot more policymakers per populace than you do in like a Brooklyn, right? So in Brooklyn, you have maybe 12 city councilmen for a neighborhood versus here where you're going to have 20 or 30, what have you, right? And so you have a lot more representation here and a little bit more bureaucracy because there's a lot more react and respond engagement with the local jurisdictions here versus a Brooklyn, right? Because obviously they just have such a large population, they can't represent everyone in the same kind of way. So when you're thinking about creating that culture for innovation to make it from the early stages to being fielded and deployed, what are the cultural elements that go into actually creating a good tech hub?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think, everybody is fairly familiar when you go through that government procurement phase of understanding the technical readiness level, or TRL level. And it's like TRL level 1 through 9, right? TRL level being 1 being, hey, we got an idea on a napkin, all the way to, hey, we've fielded this, we've done the prototyping, we've done iterations, we've sold our first product, we've got it to market, like it is ready for prime time and scalability and launch. But all of the steps in between really take some time, and that's where the collaboration of a lot of great minds coming together is very helpful. But it's also our job as an incubator and accelerator is the other piece of the validation, right? We've come across companies who are like, I've got this idea, it's amazing, it's gonna solve the next whatever. And you're like, awesome, let us validate it. Let us test it. Let us see if we can break it. Is it seal proof? And what you find is that in your mind, you may have thought you had a thing, and maybe you flush it out to the 90 percentile, but there's still that 10%. And then there's sometimes you're still like at the 20 percentile. And having that ability to have people come in and validate, hey, you're not quite there, but we've provided you an assessment of where you are at and some steps to get to where you will have what you're envisioning. Now they've got a roadmap to actually get it there. And then the great thing about a tech hub too is then all of the, the CRADAs, the CIBR 1, CIBR 2s, the OTAs, the contracting mechanisms by which we can leverage government to come alongside, along with introductions to investors and things like that, so that new incubating company can really have a chance at some growth. So that culture of bringing those type of things together really makes a difference.
Yeah, and just to add to that, not only is this from a collaborative, technical collaboration, people collaboration and such, for instance, with Neptune Shield, being that we're geographically so close to DC, we have participation involvement from retired generals, people from DC and such. So we also have conduits back into the DC. So it gets back into the regional, having it here versus in Zurich or somewhere else. We can have greater influence on policy change, on getting, if someone has that great new widget that can impact, say, critical infrastructure. We have, literally a bat phone back to DC to say, hey, you need to look at this. This needs to be evaluated. Look at the positive impact it can have on our critical infrastructure or our government operations and stuff. So that's some of the other political connectivity or connective tissue that Neptune Shield brings, not just people, not just product, but also getting it into the right people that can help influence change.
Really good points. So when you're thinking, and I like how you kind of put in the validation piece, right? So that 10% of unknown unknowns, right, that usually come with innovators or more, right? Because usually innovators, they come up with an idea, then, when you think about it from a deep tech standpoint, you're not necessarily going through the standard business model canvas that a lot of incubators will kind of force and funnel, tech companies into. You have a revolutionary stage, which is where a revolutionary new technology comes about, and then you have the evolutionary stage, which is where that revolutionary new technology now has to evolve and be adapted to the needs of a given market, right? And I know you guys do some fantastic work in that evolutionary stage to really package up a revolutionary technology and deploy it to the necessary buyers, right? And helping customers, helping innovators to actually do that, right? And that's a big thing that SOCOM, for example, and the SEALs are very good at doing. They're able to see a innovative solution and then rapidly adapt it to meet the needs of the warfighter, right? Really fast too, like far faster than many other groups. So when you're thinking about that, what are some of the issues that scale introduces to the unknown unknowns, right? So, when an innovator creates a new technology, it's usually really expensive to test it at scale, right? So you have this weird thing where, you're obviously fighting for customers, you're fighting for funding, but then you also need to validate this technology at scale. What are some of the constraints that you guys have seen, and what are some of the solutions that you guys have seen to actually validate technology at scale in the most cost-effective way?
Yeah, so, I went through a Scrum Master course before I got out of the military, and one of the things they taught us there was, and they used a use case of a gaming company that had spent millions of dollars on this gaming enterprise that they were going after to, hit the young kids with a whole new, portfolio of games and all this, and it failed. And so they're like, okay, let's throw $1 million more at it, spend another year, and it failed again. And they just kept throwing money at it. And what we learned in the Scrum course was fail often and early, fast enough so you can adapt, so you don't have to have these huge, long, expensive mistakes, so that when you do go to scale, you've got a really solid product and you're prepared now to take it to the next level, as opposed to, boy, we just keep throwing a big bunch of money into this, cesspool, and we're still not any further along. And we didn't take those lessons learned early on. So I think that's really an important aspect of really helping people to understand, of like, do the iteration process, like prototype. Let's try it again. Okay, it failed here, great. And if you need to, walk away from it when it's still early enough and go, okay, we have now overwhelmed our minds with trying to approach from this angle. Let's try a different approach. And then you really start to see innovation happen. You start to see the ability to scale. So,
That's a really good point. So when going through that process of iterating and failing frequently and often to kind of harden a solution, particularly in smart cities, how do you go about now, when you're in that validation process? How do you now go about taking the this really good idea, but then also having to introduce now subject matter experts to first off understand what this innovator is trying to accomplish, but also to drive that connectivity so that the innovators have the right resources to be able to make better design considerations or design considerations around cybersecurity, considering the fact that in many cases even our educational institutions are very far behind in their understanding of what is out there, right? Like when you think about the fact that it takes about 40 years to re-educate educators in a given country, the rate of innovation today is accelerating far faster than that, right? And at one point that was acceptable, but now we have new things that are kind of emerging that even the subject matter experts in many cases at universities aren't fully in the know on, because they traditionally focus on very narrow problem sets, right? So how do you go about finding the right subject matter experts to then come in and work with those innovators?
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with what I referred to earlier as the connective tissue. Part of a smart community is having like a smart hub that where you can have smart people get together with different products, solutions, technologies, processes, and such. When they do fail, then having working with the tech hub, which is kind of like a family of other people, so it's relationships. Yeah. So, for instance, a product may focus on being able to adapt and run a process. Well, is it protected? Can I go as a cybersecurity person, can I basically use that tool or solution against you and cause bad things to happen unintentionally? Well, in the smart community, having a smart tech hub, we can bring those, because of the relationships, bring those ideas of, oh, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about, well, how are you going to fund it? Well, we've got VC people or other people that we can introduce you to. What if you need cybersecurity? Oh, we've got those resources over here. And business relationships, government relationships. So it's the connective tissue of what is needed to bring anyone up, regardless of what it is, product, service, or support that they're trying to develop.
Very good point. So what now I kind of want to just introduce a different kind of question, a little bit of a blend in what we're discussing about smart cities today as well. But what are the differences in the way that that connective tissue is formed, or the way that you go about driving that connective tissue, culturally or what have you, between rolling out a solution like for smart cities versus rolling out a solution for war fighting?
Yeah, one of the things I really loved about being in the military was if we weren't at war, we were training for war or training how to avoid war, right? Because it's not always about actual tactical, kinetic strikes or anything like that. Oftentimes, it's how to just be a good person when you go to a third world country and just learning about 3 cups of tea, or so really education training is kind of where I would say that kind of goes. And I don't think we do that enough in the civilian world. You really have to take it upon yourself to go, oh, I'm going to pick up my phone and do Duolingo and start learning a language, as opposed to doom scrolling all day long. Why don't I use this device that's supposed to be a smartphone? It's not to make the phone smarter. It's supposed to make me smarter. What courses have I enrolled in recently? What training have I taken? Do I know how to safely operate a weapon? Maybe I should. And so I think that, one of the things that we can do is provide different types of training. We've got some courses coming up on AI, and what is this thing, AI, and how do I use it in my own world? And you see it in your world, but you may not be aware of it. When you're in the grocery store and you walk by and one of the freezer lights comes on, that's great. Now, if you were the owner of that grocery store, wouldn't you want your electrical bill to be lower because you're only lighting when people need it? And so all of the innovations that have happened over the course of our lifetime, it came because somebody took the time to either get a big education, which is a long haul. Sometimes, getting a master's degree takes a while. Or they just enrolled in some kind of course and certification just to improve yourself. So I think that that's one of the aspects that we're looking forward to doing. We're working with Office of Secretary of Defense. We're bringing in a cohort of 90 students this summer to go through a 6-week program to just learn about what's going on in the military world here in the Hampton Roads area. But I would encourage citizens to also get involved and use the libraries, the universities, all of the different platforms that are readily available for yourselves to make you part of what makes a smart city smart. Not the technology, but how we can be better at using the technology to improve our lives.
I'll share 2 anecdotes to kind of share, kind of my philosophy on this. One is when I worked at the Chamber of Commerce, we had a group of people that wanted to start getting into government contracting. And so it's very typical to do, long-range acquisition plan meetings or things like that. But I was like, some of these people have never even done a government contract. They don't even know what solution they want to provide yet. They don't know what the problem is. So we took them on tours. And in the Fredericksburg area, we have, Quantico right there. So you have the FBI Training Academy, you have DEA, you've got all these things. Then we talk also to, Veterans Affairs and those types of things. And, there was a developer that went, and I was like, why is a developer coming? And then 6 months later, there's an RFP for a new hospital for veterans. And all of a sudden, we now have one of the largest, outpatient facilities in Spotsylvania, Virginia for Veterans Affairs. Sometimes people don't know what problems there are in the government, and then all that takes is that connective tissue that these guys keep talking about. The other one that I'll share is, sometimes you don't have the right people in the room. I went to a meeting one time on economic development down the Northern Neck. The Northern Neck of Virginia has the two of the grayest counties in the United States, meaning they have gray hair, right? And we were sitting in a meeting and they said, we have this great idea. We're going to build a walking path. Millennials love walking paths. We're going to dedicate millions of dollars to this. We're going to make this walking path. And then when millennials come here, they're going to walk on the path and say, I really want to raise my family here. I was the only millennial in the room. And I said, that walking path is not going to make me come there because there's no job for me. So I can walk and be like, man, this is beautiful. So sometimes people will solve a problem that doesn't exist, or they find a solution set because they don't have the right people in the room. They don't even have the audience that they're intending. So if it's the warfighter, if it's, distribution automation, if it's a distributed energy resource, you're talking about people with home solar or things like that. You don't even have residential people in your room. Who are you talking to then? Who are you developing this product for? You have to have the right people in the room to find those problems in order to align the solutions with them.
Really good point. So obviously we can't have a discussion about smart cities without touching on AI and the implications of AI and its use in a smart city. So when we're thinking about applications of artificial intelligence in smart cities today, what are some of the hurdles, or we could just call it hurdles. What are some of the hurdles that are introduced given its infancy in a sense, and its the general lack of understanding of what AI really is, given that it's a really complex topic? What are the hurdles that are posed in the rollout and the policy side, given that we actually have a tremendous lack of policy relating to AI right now, so it makes it hard for a local jurisdiction to make a sizable investment in architecture that's going to power a smart city one day, right? So what are some of the things that you guys face when you're having these conversations and advising some of the companies that you guys work with?
I think a lot of it has to do with, well, what is AI? Again, like a smart city, you're going to get many different answers. AI itself is not smarter than people. It just processes information from people faster than people can process it. So you can't go and say, AI, solve this problem for me. It's only going to regurgitate what you already know, just in a faster medium. So it falls back onto people. People still have to be the front end to an AI. You still have to gather, understand what is the information, what are the parameters, what's the scope, what are you trying to do. You still have to define all that from a people standpoint. Then once you do, then you can give it to the AI to automate it and do that faster for you. So some of the limitations are people setting up the AI and not thinking that AI is going to solve the problems for them. They have to solve it first. It just does it faster after you do it.
Yeah, I want to do a bit of audience interaction if I can. Raise your hand if you have a corporate AI policy right now on the books. Okay. And I was going to say, keep your hand raised if you think it's agile enough to keep up with the advancements of AI, but I think that, that solves it right there. And if you don't have one, does your local government have one? No. That's the hurdle, I think, right? I think the opportunities, though, are does every school division in Virginia and the United States have enough teachers? Do they have enough dispatchers? Do they have enough people that do bus routing? Do they have enough clerks for taxes? Do they, all these things that are really, really difficult for localities to hire for. If anyone here has a talented and gifted student or a student with special needs, those students at the fringe often get left behind. And yet that's what the opportunity is with AI, because now you can have an actual independent learning program for students without dedicating personnel to it. And none of these things are possible without a solid AI policy, but you're not going to be able to get there just yet because it is such a new thing, and I don't think everyone's even really thought through all those great opportunities. But it's exactly to your point, it's going to do those computational things that take up too much time and too much bandwidth that there's just simply not enough people. And I just think of all the incredible opportunities, even in my own life, of scheduling and knowing when my kid has a play and all the things that I should be doing as a parent, being able to keep up with those things. I see great opportunity, but there's tremendous risk that just has to be balanced and mitigated.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times people, want to make sure that in the OODA loop, that we keep the human in the loop, right? And for those of you who are not familiar with the OODA loop, it's observe, orient, decide, and act. Unless you're a Marine, then it stands for observe, overreact, destroy, and apologize. But yeah, there we go. I knew there was one in the room. But it's important to make sure that we keep humans in the loop on those important decisions. We don't want to allow, weapons free to go to a computer because we're afraid that we're going to be the next target when they realize how vulnerable and weak and messed up we are as an entity on this planet. So, there's certain things we don't want to allow AI to do, and I don't necessarily need it to do all my writing for me. I enjoy writing. What I really want it to do is take my laundry off my hands, my washing the dishes on my hands, so I can focus more time on the creative aspect of the stuff that we as humans are really great at. And I think that's where the American ingenuity comes in. We're good at coming up with stuff. We just need a little bit of a help from something. If we had data from, data from Star Trek. If I had that guy walking around in my house and he had ethics and morals not to cross certain boundaries, great, awesome, let's put him to work. So I think that, as we grow over the next 10, 20, 30 years, we'll start to see that we get more comfortable with robots, with AI, all those type of things. But we just want to make sure that when we open Pandora's box, that it's not this huge mess that's going to wind up, creating the, 1989 situation from Predator, or not Predator, but
Skynet.
Skynet, yeah. We don't want Skynet to go active. So.
War game.
Yes. So what implications do you see that having? And really when you apply the use of AI for the companies that you guys work with to, be it write a proposal or, better describe a technology, because sometimes, innovators even struggle to explain the applicability of the technologies that they're creating, right? Because especially when it's at a high level, sometimes we actually don't have the proper language to describe some of these, innovations. So what implications do you see AI having on the ability to accelerate proposals and accelerate, things that normally take a lot longer because it requires so much cognitive effort to, push out?
I'll share a quick way that we've instituted AI. Has anyone here ever dealt with a massive multi-day outage event? Okay. In 2022, I dealt with a multi-day snowstorm, and I myself fielded about 3,000 private Facebook messages and responded to over 4,000 Facebook comments. Today, I don't think I'd be doing that because I now have an AI assistant on Facebook Messenger to reply to comments and reply to questions. I don't mind giving that to them, because now that I've given them kind of what our parameters are, our ethics, our morals, how much compassion we like to provide, now every single person has their own way to get information that they need in that moment of desperation and fear and anxiety. It doesn't matter if it's 2 a.m., it doesn't matter if it's, what they're getting accurate, timely information. I'm not offloading that to a call center in God knows wherever that doesn't get our members. I'm offloading it to someone that has used all of our interactions previously to communicate with compassion that we expect. But it's when our member is feeling the most anxious and nervous and upset and worried in that disaster situation, they can get a response and feel some level of comfort that when they wake up, their kid's not going to be hungry and tired and cold and wet and all those things.
Just a question for the audience. When you've dealt with AI in situations where you're reaching out to a company like that and you're getting an automatic response, there are certain things that are like, okay, great, thank you, you helped me, that was perfect, appreciate it. But how many would love to see an override button and go like, okay, I really need to talk to a human? Let's raise your hand if you. Okay, so I think that right there illustrates the point that in my mind, AI is like a college graduate. They've not had any real world experience, but they got a lot of head knowledge. And what we really are looking for is this hybrid between, I want you to be really smart, but I also need you to have some street smarts, because there's going to be some things that just human experience and being around the planet a while is really going to help us to get to where we're actually communicating on a level that really truly solves my problem. And so I think that's kind of the thing that all of us in each of our different arenas in our companies really need to be learning and leaning forward on, is making sure that we have some stopgaps in there so that he's not having to field 4,000 questions, but he might have to still field maybe 10, maybe 20, 50, 100, because there truly still needs to be the human in the loop. So I just encourage each of you in your own companies to make sure that we provide those off ramps where it's like, no. This is not what I'm looking for. Thank you, but I need a little bit more fidelity because my situation is different.
And all the AI is going to do is recite a script that someone wrote for it. It's not, it doesn't know something someone else doesn't already know. It can't make up stuff. It can't it doesn't have a crystal ball and predict what's going to happen. It's just going to regurgitate what someone told it or wrote down for it to say.
Really good points. All right, so since the theme of this event this year is energy, obviously we can't have a discussion without kind of touching on energy and the defense of critical infrastructure, right? So when we're kind of transitioning out of the AI topic into thinking about defense of critical infrastructure in smart cities, what are some of the layers of protection that go into defending critical infrastructure? So, for example, let's just kind of, when you're thinking about a school, right, and you want to prevent mass shootings, just having weapon detection in the school is one component of general security, but what are the other components of that security that would go into really creating a secure environment, right? So obviously that applies to critical infrastructure now at a far larger scale. So what are the different components that go into critical defense infrastructure, critical infrastructure?
From an energy standpoint, because I do a lot of consulting to energy companies around the world, they have gone, okay, the power grid 20, 30 years ago used to be a lot of manual switches. I could cut it on, I could cut it off. Great. Now, everything in the power grid is electronic. Everything is controlled by smart, intelligent boxes, which are really programmed by people to respond under certain circumstances. So because of that, the grid has become so automated. Now, if you do not protect it from a cyber standpoint, then what's to prevent someone, a nation state or hacker, internally, externally, or across the globe, from being able to go in and literally play with your switches, turn stuff on, turn stuff off, overload certain circuits, which burns out motors and transformers in certain places. So it's more than just turning it on and off. It can actually do damage to equipment and critical infrastructure. And then that could cause to chemical companies and other really dangerous environments. So being able, because we've become so automated, we've got to put a harder layer shell of protection from a standpoint of cyber. Who has access, who can do proper segmentation. That's another thing we try to do to help limit the risk and vulnerability, is to do segmentation. So only certain things can happen in certain areas, but there's only the control center with smart people, AI, not AI, can go and make things operate in outside of its normal parameters. So there's a lot of, the power grid has evolved and we're lagging behind it. So more needs to be done in that area.
Yeah, I think there's also, there were two, it was a story shared earlier about the transformer device having a back end in it. There's also been issues of, the knucklehead just going out and shooting it. And, we can think of threats and issues all day long. There are numerous threats, and we talked about this a little bit before the panel started, but everyone likes to think of the electric grid, because we use that word grid, that it's an Excel spreadsheet, and there's all these neurons that are connecting and everything else, but it's really more like a tree root. And there's a lot of critical paths that policymakers, will say things like they'll make a policy so that that grid's more transparent, so that renewable energy developers can access that information and can find where to interconnect. And we're like, whoa, pause. Like, who has made that green energy LLC company and wants that data. Because it'd be very easy to find those paths to break them. I think a key part of the onion that we need to think about is crap is going to hit the fan. So what do you have to respond to that, right? In terms of policy, in North Carolina, they had to cut a whole new right of way, build a new substation. In my mind, I'm like, okay, you got zoning, you got DEQ, you got all these things, but in a crisis situation, are we really going to be worried about the barn owls? Or, we've got to have some decisions that need to be made in advance so that we can make those decisions more quickly to respond. You're not going to be able to have a backup 145 MVA transformer just sitting in a yard somewhere. So what is going to be your redundancy plan? And it's not to have another one in the yard. You've got to have some other backup situation, and maybe it's distributed DER programs. Maybe it's a bunch of Teslas in their garages. But then there's policy issues in terms of rate recovery and cost shifting and load balancing and all kinds of things that bring up all those other issues that are fun for electric engineers to talk about. So I really don't worry so much about the threats because you would stay up all night thinking about them. I worry more about, okay, if you have this batch of threats, okay, that's all just taking out a transformer. What do I do to replace that transformer? That's the more critical path for me because it is going to happen. You are going to have some knucklehead plug in a USB. You are going to have a knucklehead shoot out a transformer. You are going to have these things happen. So you already know what the targets are going to be. So let's just go ahead and have a plan to replace those.
In those large transformers, there's about a 3-year wait to have them custom made and delivered. So if we lose these large transformers, they're not sitting in a yard somewhere. A quick anecdote, who remembers a couple years ago, Boston and all up through the North America, there was about 50 million people lost power years ago. Well, what happened is we did some forensics on that. Someone messed up a relay switch up in Canada. They did the wrong switches. That went cascaded down to the next substation. All the substations are saying, okay, I'm monitoring my input feeds and my output feeds. And if I lose an input feed, then I need to either draw more from here, turn this input on, or I may need to limit what I've got going out. So there's an automation. So what happened was it was a cascade effect. It started in Canada, went down through Michigan, and they went down to the next substation. It says, oh, I'm getting a brownout. I need to go and re-switch my input and output cables. Okay, they did that. The next substation did the same thing. So it went all the way around, down into Ohio, and all the way up into Boston. It was because someone misconfigured a switch in Canada, cascaded it all the way around and shut down power for about 50 million people. Lesson learned from that. Maybe there needs to be some, stop gaps to prevent some things like that, or maybe there needs to be reconfiguration of these automatic switches and relays that are part of the power system.
Very good point. So what role do you guys think that open source intelligence plays in adaptive risk profiling?
One of the things I love about the OSINT community is that it really is a wealth of information of those threat patterns that I was just talking about a few minutes ago, which is great. But I just don't really like to get bogged down in that because, like I said before, it's pretty easy for me to think of all the things that could go wrong. It's much more difficult to think about what needs to be done to solve them, and that's where I would love to see that community kind of evolve, actually. Because it's easy to talk about, EMPs and this and that and everything else, but what's the solution? We talk about, where are the stop gaps or I would love some kid to figure out a better way to design the grid. I'm waiting for one of these genius kids to just be like, hey, have you ever thought about just, swapping the A phase and B phase? And it's just some, thing that just absolutely just creates I'm so excited about, everyone is really fearful of data centers and the draw of electricity and everything else. I am so looking forward to it because we've taken electricity for granted for 100 years. And we are finally putting innovation first in this space. And this is the wake-up call that everything is not sunshine and butterflies. And this is also the wake-up call that this is an exciting and necessary industry. And that's where innovation needs to occur. So thankfully, with events like this, and you have college students, if you had asked me a decade ago if I wanted to work in the energy industry, I would have said, yawn, no. Now, hopefully they're saying slay and, Yas Queen and everything else these college kids say, and choosing a career in energy, whether it's energy law, regulatory, all these things, because our country's success is now dependent on electricity. And that wasn't the case over the last 50 years, but it is now.
And just to add to that you just brought up one of our big risk and vulnerabilities that we have regarding the power grid. The people that understand the power grid, the people that built it, have been managing it for 20-something years, are retiring or have retired. Right now, NERC, North American Electric Reliability Corporation, that runs the power grid for North America, they've actually brought this up as a dire emergency. They don't have trained people now because they don't teach it in schools. So schools teach IT, information technology, switches, networks, computers, things like that. Great. OT, operational technology, SCADA systems, industrial control system, command and control, the things that actually make things work. Who teaches that? Show me a class on operational SCADA and such. You'll be hard pressed to find one. So when it comes to education and training, what we've learned in IT is great, but it doesn't port over very well because of things like PLCs, programmable logic controllers, different protocols, serial ports, Goose programming language, all kinds of things that RS-232, things that work in OT that don't work in IT, it's not being taught. No one teaches it, no one's learning it. So there's a giant deficiency in training and in those areas. So if there's a student out there wanting to know what's happening next, AI is great. OT, I believe, is where that's the biggest thing that we're missing. And if you can get trained in those areas, you'll be far ahead of AI and everybody else, in my opinion.
Yeah, it may be silly, but every kid knows that Edison invented the light bulb, Wright brothers invented flight, but they can't tell you that the largest machine ever made by man is the Eastern Interconnection System.
Yep.
And that's sad because it is the thing that powers their everyday life. It's what powers their switch so they can play Fortnite, but they have no clue. So we need to make this industry. It is important, but we need to bring it more into focus and align our education system to show that importance.
We've done some great things like create the Hoover Dam and the Panama Canal, and dual use technologies like the Jeep and the Humvee that are now used in the civilian market. The microwave oven that was started originally in a test lab, and I won't say the base, but lasers, for example. All of these different things that help us live our lives better started somewhere. They started with innovation. There's no reason why we can't take that same great American ingenuity and apply it towards the energy sector and really help revolutionize how we do business and how we can do it better. There's a lot of great companies we work with in the post-quantum encryption to help cloak and mask networks. We've got camera systems who now are being applied towards substations to be able to kind of observe what's going on, because it's no use in putting a human out there to be on guard all night long. But what if we also then carried over some of that drone as a first responder, so when that knucklehead does start shooting at that transformer, okay, we've already got a drone heading out there, but even before that, we've got a computer system there with monitors and sirens going off, warning the person to go away. There's just so much that we can do in this innovation and energy sector. I'm excited to see where the next 5 to 10 years go.
really good point, and I'm really happy that you brought up the kind of push now that we've seen in the last 18 months on energy infrastructure, especially because of AI, right? And earlier this week, there was a lot of talk about the investments that France is making on energy. To put it into context, their current nuclear investments and investments relating to artificial intelligence infrastructure support has been risen. It has raised to the early nuclear days, the early 1900s when they were first starting to work on nuclear. So, countries are starting to wake up now to the fact that you can't have AI without compute, and without compute, you can't, without energy, you don't get compute, right? So when thinking about that, what are some of the things that, be it a policymaker or be it an energy company, can do to be more prepared to adapt at the rate that this is changing, and at the scale at which the demand that's going to be coming online is really hitting them?
I'm being here right now.
Yeah.
I mean, if you had asked Northern Neck Electric Cooperative to participate in a national security call, meeting, whatever, 10 years ago, I would have said, for what? We served the town of Warsaw and, Richmond County, and I doubt anyone in here has ever even been there. But now we're critical infrastructure because we're serving at least 1.2 gigawatts of data centers over the next decade. So, I can't, those can't go night-night, I've got to have those up 24/7. And so everything is changing, and we're doing things now that we've never done before. Talk about, innovation hubs and things like that. We're starting to partner with places like NSWC Dahlgren. They have an innovation lab, and pairing their engineers with our electrical engineers, or going to our local federal prison system and having their security guards work with our personnel to start doing cross training and thinking about all the different paramilitary style thoughts and processes and things like that. We do a lot with the FBI now through ODEC to do training on cybersecurity and things like that. And just the awareness and being involved, I think, is the big one. But I think also just us being advocates for this industry is going to be the next one. I don't think I had ever done a career fair at work, 4 years ago. But exactly what you're talking about, a third of our workforce is retiring over the next 5 years. So every single middle school, high school career day event thing that they have, I'm at, which ends up being, 600 interactions in a year or something crazy like that. And that's the investment we need to make so that we have that workforce ready and excited and eager and ready to work.
Yeah, and just to add about the growth, for instance, here in Virginia, Virginia is the data center capital of the country. You have roughly 52 million square feet of data center space throughout the state. The plan for the next 10 years is to add another 58 million square feet of data center space. So over the next 10 years, you're looking at doubling what you already have. That right there shows just how much compute is going to have an impact, which also is going to be power, water, energy, and people, resources, and technology capabilities that's going to keep evolving exponentially.
Yeah, I think that the other part that I wanted to add is just, we want to do an investment in the future by reaching out to the younger generations and really instilling that sense of, hey, you can give back in a unique way that you haven't thought of before. But I also want to encourage people not to dismiss the older generation, right? Billy Joel said it very well, Vienna waits for you. It's because Europeans really value the older population, and they see that there's a lot of wisdom and knowledge from our older generations. They've been there. They've done that. They want to share their story. They want to share their wisdom with you, but you just have to ask because they're not going to put it on you. So I would encourage you to find some of the older generation. I'm not sure I'm saying that politically right or whatever, but who cares? You know what I'm saying, right? I don't have gray hairs completely yet, but I'm starting to get some because I got 5 kids. Yeah. So, but, I think it's important that we look towards the future, but we also not forget the past. And that's where humanity can really help advance the combination of AI, innovation, acceleration, and the energy sectors and all of the different sectors that we've talked about over this 2-day symposium, and really bring together the best and the brightest and make what makes smart cities smart is us.
Dr. Bush, do we have time for some questions quick?
I think we are out of time.
Okay.
But we really appreciate the really insightful discussion that we had with you today. So thank you please join me in thanking the panel.
Thank you.